Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Justice. We have Sean, who's helping co-host today, and has Shondra. Did I say that right?
You did.
Yes. With us, she is the co-owner of the Pink Group. She's an author and owner of Don't Overthink Me LLC. What a great name. And she also runs a nonprofit. She's got a plethora of things on her resume, which I'm sure we'll get all into. But she also talks and practices with others how a safe place is a safe place to release. And we want to know all about that. Thank you so much for being in here with us today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank y'all for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go from the beginning. You went through a domestic violence situation. Can you kind of tell us about it?
I did. Just to start, I got married for all of the wrong reasons, but I learned through just living that it was just a life experience. And in that situation, domestic violence was one of the reasons that we did get a divorce. But through that situation, I also learned not to point the finger at the other person, but to point the finger at myself, to self evaluate. And just by understanding that process, I've been able to assist others with dealing with domestic violence and how to self correct as well.
Were there children involved in this marriage?
There was, I had a daughter before getting married, and then we had a daughter within the marriage.
So did either one of the children get any kind of the domestic violence themselves, or did they see it?
It was seen by both of my girls because a lot of times it wasn't hidden. We would
Right.
argue in front of them. I tried to protect them as much as possible, but of course they seen it, they heard it. As I got out of it, one thing as a parent and one thing that I like to advise parents as well is just getting rid of the guilt and starting parenting over again. Um, Understanding that it happened, understanding the consequences that happen because of domestic violence, but also understanding that life has to go on. So we have to continue to set those boundaries between the past and the present.
Right. How are your girls today?
They're great. My oldest is actually a college student. She's a sophomore in college. And my youngest is an author as well. And she's an entertainer. She's actually preparing to go to an expo for entertainment this summer. So they are healthy.
Good.
We are processing, and I encourage them just to talk to me if they're having issues. And one thing that I've learned with my girls is I might not be the person or the voice that they need to hear. So I encourage them, if you need to speak to somebody else and you don't want to talk to mama, that's okay, because egos are not in play. We have to just put those egos to the side so that growth and development can come within ourselves as well within our children and others.
Wow, that's like the most powerful statement for sure. I love that. I love the dropping the ego in that process, and I find that I'm not a parent, but I can assume that that would be a very challenging thing for parents to do, is to drop that ego and feel like that they can surrender that kind of control in terms of allowing others to play that influence over their kid, just kind of in that self-awareness piece of being like, maybe I'm not the right person to talk to about certain things. And so that's phenomenal. How have you found that to kind of impact your kids and your relationship with them? Is that
I think that it helps them because I help other people, with sitting down and with listening to some of my clients, because I'm a certified life coach. So with life coaching and life consulting, I realized that the people who are the closest to them in their lives, they're not able to have certain conversations with. So who am I to think that just the people who are the closest to me have to have those conversations with me as well? And even with me, there was times coming up that I didn't want to speak to my parents, or I didn't want to speak to my best friend. I didn't, because they knew different aspects of my life. But if I talked to a stranger or I talked to somebody I was more comfortable with, there was more growth that took place. So for me, the growth is just more important than it's, oh, I did it. I helped my children to get over this. It doesn't matter who helps them. It matters that they get over it and that they move forward. And that's the same thing with me. It doesn't matter who helped me. If the information comes from my worst enemy, which I don't think I have any, but if the information came from my worst enemy and it helped me to grow, You have to make sure that you're comfortable enough with yourself, that your mind is in a place to receive that information so that you can grow. And I think that's a lot of times why survivors struggle, is because of where the information comes from or where the help might come from.
Hmm. No, I think that's like one of the, I think, that's one of the more powerful messages that I've heard is really about keeping that growth mindset. And it sounds like you've really honed that skill in terms of, really living that truth of, kind of how does that growth mindset manifest itself into your life in the most powerful ways. And I think that, exposing your relationship with your kids to that and being able to, step aside when need to is such a powerful message. I think in so many ways, our society needs to hear that. So many parents, I feel like, stand in the way of their kids' growth because they want to be the ones that are the main influence, because they feel that just because they are a parent and hold that role and wear that hat, that, that their voice is what is the most important. And yet it seems that you may have the evidence to suggest otherwise. And not only that, but also are kind of modeling a solution for that. And that's really, that's powerful. Because I know that in the world of like, which, Victoria and I are such a part of, we're huge advocates for, kind of sexual education and, this kind of body of work. And in the opposition to sexual education is this idea that, that the parents are the ones that are supposed to be the ones teaching all of that. And as you had kind of mentioned, that there are some topics that you may not want to, as a child, to be able to talk with your parents about. And so it's really, I think there's a kind of a pivotal intersection here to understand that there may be areas that, we as a society have to get together and really try to figure out, how do we move forward and have these conversations, these complex educational kind of curriculums in a way that's safe for the kids, as well as, that the parents are either involved or can, kind of play kind of a stepped back role. Not that they're completely out of that conversation by any means, but just, allow for that space to exist where, the parent may not be the best one to have those conversations, because really what you said, as you addressed, it's more important that your kids grow, more important that they get those lessons and that they learn and, become, better and better, more than it is that the information came from the parents. So I think that's such a powerful message.
So can you talk about when you said you went through domestic violence? There's so many different areas that covers. Can you tell us a little bit more in detail about what it was that you had to unfortunately endure?
So for me, it was every aspect. It was physical, it was verbal, it was control as far as finances.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I had to learn the hard way, because it was a shocker to most of my friends and family when I came out about some of the things that were going on in my marriage, because most people look at me and they consider me to be a strong woman, just the labels, and they just never knew it was happening. And I would always fight back. So that kind of with my fight back, it kind of caused us to fight even more, because they would hit, I would hit. You hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. And then one day I was just like, you know what? I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm not gonna argue with you. I'm not gonna fuss with you. I'm just not. Like, no, because I'm better than this. And I had to go down and really understand what was the core of my issue. And the core of my issue was pride. It was admitting that I failed at a marriage, because marriage and, longevity was important to me. So I
Right.
had to restructure my mind there. But just the physical, the verbal, the what I'm not. And then we have people who have smaller minds, or maybe intimidated by our creativity, or in my situation, just kind of intimidated about who I was as an individual, what I brought to the table, and those type things. So that just brought a little bit of intimidation with words. And then with financial, I was a housewife at the time, and I was building my own brand, building my own business. So I had to rely on my spouse for financial support in most cases. And so when I left the marriage, I actually left with $37 in my bank account, and I left everything. Only thing I took was my children and our clothes. And I moved into my mother's laundry room, 1 bedroom apartment. My children lived with in my mom's room for 6 months, and I turned her laundry room into my room. And we did that for 6 months until I got back on my feet and got established.
Good for you. Good for
Wow.
you. I want you to know, Shondra, that you didn't fail at your marriage, that it wasn't you who failed. That you need to like understand that that's not your fault. You know, if there's no reason a human being should put their hands on another human in an unwarranted manner. And when that happens, then it's not your fault. You know, Sean and I have done some interviews that would just shock you, to say the least. And one of which was someone who, and I know Sean will know immediately who I'm talking about, who was he was sexually assaulted, and then he went after the person who did it, and now he advocates for like pedophilia and sexual assault. Like he advocates for them, and that's like a really big shock. It was a shock, you know, to us. But the difference is that you didn't fail your marriage. It's about your mindset and the fact that you don't ask for that. You don't raise your hand and say, hey, why don't you come make me your playground of violence? Nobody asks for that. So it's only a failed marriage, Chandra, if you stay.
Mhm.
That's when it becomes a failed marriage, because your children look at you and your significant other as the ones that are supposed to teach us how to be in the next phase of life. And they're role models. And if they see that behavior, then they're going to say, and in your case, you have girls, that it's okay for a man to be that way to them, that it's okay that they're treated that way, that it's okay to talk to others that way. And therefore, because you got out, it's not a failed marriage. And in order, really, to be honest, it's a successful marriage because you successfully got out, you successfully saved your kids, and look at you now, you're thriving. So please, please, please don't think that you had a failed marriage, because it's only a failed marriage if you stay. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense. That's why the pride just had to be dropped. So once I got past that mindset, it really, really helped just to move forward, just getting over the pride. And just to go back to something that she said, it was more important for me with my girls, for them to understand that strong doesn't always mean staying, that
Right.
it can mean
That
leaving.
is the strength. The strength
Yes,
is you leaving.
yes. And then more importantly, for them to have those good examples of what marriage looks like. And just
Right.
because it happened to me doesn't mean that it has to happen to you. So we're very verbal about that.
Right. What happened now? Didn't you kind of go into the wrong direction at first when you first started to leave the situation?
I'm sorry, if you could just elaborate just a little bit.
What happened to you? What changes were made in you and how you lived once you started to go through this?
So once I actually said, okay, I'm done, I'm out, I'm gonna move in with my mom, I'm gonna just restart my life. I got this $37, but we're gonna work at it. I actually found out that I had cancer. I was
Sorry.
having issues within my health, my cholesterol levels, my skin. I went up to about 200 pounds, and just everything physically was going down because of the stress. I was dealing with vertigo that wasn't identified at the time. So I had to take a whole step back and just like reevaluate my whole health situation,
Right.
reevaluate my mind, my body, and most importantly, my spirit. So I started to change my eating habits. I'm now a vegetarian. I actually started doing research about how to heal the body naturally of cancer. So I got that was actually called early. Haven't had any issues with that.
Good.
No more cholesterol issues. And literally, as far as vertigo, I went about some natural remedies as well called prolotherapy. So all of those things were just identified and handled, but I had to take that step back and realize that I needed that therapy. I needed that time. I needed that mindset change in order to be a better individual, not just for myself, but for my family as well.
That's fantastic that you were able to really get a handle on a lot of those like physical health things, because I know that plays such a huge toll into the mental and emotional and all the stress that would, kind of must have been there as you were transitioning out of that kind of a toxic, abusive kind of situation. So I definitely commend you for that. That's incredible. Especially while living in a laundry room, that had to have been a pretty tough transitional moment for sure. I just have a question about the idea and the mindset of like the fine line that exists between this kind of conditioning that we receive around people being in relationships and like fighting kind of being normalized, like this idea that we're going to have conflict in relationship, and yet there seems to be obvious lines that you don't cross, right? Putting hands on somebody seems to be the obvious line, and yet when it does kind of occur, or it gets close to that, or all of the preceding stuff, more the big, intense, volatile, emotional stuff, that seems to get like normalized in the idea that, well, when you live with somebody, you have a significant other, you spend all this time in a relationship, like there's this concept that just gets normalized. Like, so how do you speak to like really understanding where that line is, and how we don't like gotta speed and crash over that line, but how do we, kind of navigate that beforehand?
And it all comes down to self-love and understanding what love is and identifying what self-love looks like to you. And that's something that I really had to do. I had to ask myself, Hassandra, do you really love yourself? And if you love yourself, then why are you allowing this to happen? And so, what do we need to do in order for your definition of self love to actually manifest into your actions of how you live your daily life? So, I started writing, and I started using the songs, or writing songs and utilizing the lyrics to help me push through my process. So, when I felt like I wasn't portraying self love, or I wasn't acting on the self love that I knew that I was capable of doing, I would go back to those writings just to kind of measure out my process. So when it comes to just normalizing what's not normal, we have to identify what we actually consider to be normal, or what we actually want. So that measuring stick is what I call it. And so when I go back and I look at those things that I was allowing to happen, I'm like, this person doesn't even equal up to what I have defined a man or a mate to be. So why am I here? And what's making me stay here? So then again, going in and internalizing that self-love, and then having to do what I need to do in order to live out self-love. So I always tell people, check yourself, measure your self-love. Are you really living up to it? And first of all, do you know what love is? How do you define love? So defining is a lot of the process too, because a lot of times we don't understand the word. So it's hard to live out a word that we don't even understand.
Right, because I mean, in so many ways, like we get modeled like these kind of versions of love, right? We get all the content from like television and Hollywood movies and all these types of things about what love is, and and it kind of stops at the happily ever after ending, right? It seems like the story stops like once you get married, even though most of us know, who have been through that's really where the story begins, and that's where like the some of the work, like, most of the work begins once that kind of commitment has been made. And all of a sudden now we're flying blind with no real, education around what it means to be in a long-term relationship, cohabitating, living in this space. You're wearing multiple hats. You were once friends. Now you're lovers, but you're also roommates. There's business, there's financial stresses and kids and parenting and all that stuff. And it's like navigating all of that while also trying to work on your emotional intelligence and how to navigate a relationship. It's just challenging because there's not a lot of information out there, especially for young people, that's really accessible, that people, when you're young, like you really even want to pay attention to, because you don't even, you're fixated on the like storybook ending. You're wanting that, like the infatuation feelings, and you're focused on that. You're focused on the physical stuff, right? You're kind of in this like intimate and sexual relationship. Chemistry is what you're really focused on. But yet, I think for a lot of people who've been in like long-term relationships that may have turned south and gone sour, I know, for speaking from my own experience, I was in a couple of relationships that it got normalized that we were fighting all the time. Like it got normalized in that concept of, oh, and especially in my first marriage, it was like, there was this normalization on both of our sides. It was like, oh, this is what husbands and wives do. They fight. And yet there was something inside of me that was like, this is not how I want to live. This is so stressful. You know, it's like the whole outside world is stressful enough, but when I come home, I need a partner that I can fight against the world with and not feel like everything is fighting me.
A safe place.
Yeah. And so, you know, I think that that's one of the things that, you know, when we're putting together all this content, we're trying to like really stress about the emotional intelligence side, the realization of like how to be in a relationship, how to talk to each other in a non-violent way. It's not that conflict won't come up. It's really how do we navigate conflict in a healthy way when it comes up so that we can actually, you know, work together as a team against this challenge versus, you know, against this communication issue maybe, or whatever shared reality conflict may come up. But like, how do we handle those specific moments so that they don't just have to go into the space of just like yelling and screaming at each other? Because once we get emotions out of control, it kind of becomes, you know, sometimes it can be a very challenge to like pull ourselves back from that.
Response is everything. And then just understanding yourself again, because we cannot make anybody do anything. We can't make a baby stop crying. You can't control the other person. The only person you can control is yourself. So once you get yourself under control and you sit in a place of just comfort and knowing, like you said, I'm not going to argue, I'm not going to do this. I know what I want my peace to look like. Once you do all of that and you know that you're not in that situation, you have to be strong enough to actually leave or to address the issue. If the other person really wants to be with you, they're going to address their issues as well. I have these affirmations on my wall. And one of them says, when I'm defining my mate, one of them says, individually living our lives together. That is something that I want with my soulmate. I want to be me. I want them to be them, but I want us to be able to communicate enough for us to sit down and be us too, because that's important to me. And I've learned from my past marriage that I know what I don't want, you know? So now that I know what I don't want, let me define what I want. So I've written down those things. And again, it goes back to the measuring stick. We have to define what we want and who we are. And once we define those two things, business relationships, personal relationships, and private relationships, we're going to have something to measure it to. And we're not measuring it to the world standards. We're measuring it to our own definition. And another thing I like to do is grace myself to know if 6 months from now, there's something that I've written down that I don't want anymore, I have the power to take that off. It's okay. I grace myself. I talk to myself. I listen to myself, and I grace myself every day. Those are my tools just to keep my mind together. So in those situations, I just tell people to, you know, understand that response is power and that you can only control yourself. And when you understand the self-control controls your whole world because you create your world, then you're in a whole nother atmosphere of just living.
Absolutely. Tell me about Attached. And I have to tell you, Shondra, I love the follow-up book title, Unattached. Like, it's just so simple, but so catchy. It's so cute. Like, I was like, that is so cute. You have Attached, Unattached. Like, it's just the best follow-up. Sorry, I just thought the titles were fantastic. Tell us about your books.
So Attached is how I lost my virginity at 16 and the emotional trauma that it caused. I feel as teenagers, we get spoken to a lot about, you know, the STDs, the teen pregnancy, but nobody really focused on the emotional part of losing your virginity. And so I like to dig into my own story just to show those emotional traumas. So Unattached is actually my 20-year journey of discovering the authentic me in the area of romantic love. So I utilize my love journey to just basically talk on different points of my life, from spiritual to financial to relationships, and just how I unrambled myself to become who I am today. And also to interject that I'm still growing, I'm still developing, I'm still learning. The learning never stops. So that's what those two books are about.
Yes, I apologize. I'm eating a mint. I apologize. Tell me about what your emotional situation you went through when you lost your virginity at 16, because you are so right. Nobody talks about that. No one.
So no one ever told me that I had to stop playing basketball if I was a teen parent. So that's one of the things that happened.
Oh, you
I
got pregnant when you lost your virginity.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now
So and I lost the baby,
I'm
my
so
oldest
sorry.
son. So there was the emotional trauma of death. There was the emotional trauma of church. I was a youth leader at the time, so I was set down. There was the emotional trauma of family members, of the community talking about me. You know, there was all those emotional things that I had to go through at 16. And then after all of those things happened, I still didn't have anything to show for it. I didn't have a baby, you know?
Right.
So a year later, I actually got pregnant again with my oldest daughter, who is 19 now. So then I went through the teen mom stage and,
Mhm.
you know, just dealing with the fact that he was a teen father. And so I always tell people that being a mom wasn't being a teen mom wasn't the worst thing. It was the emotional drama that was the worst thing. I'm trying to understand myself while trying to teach someone else who to be, who they're supposed to be. So that
Yeah.
was the biggest thing when I could have been living. There's no regrets. However, I do I just do have those moments where I'm kind of like, what if I would have kept myself? And then I had to get rid of those what if moments. So overcoming all of that as well.
Wow.
There's power
Uh,
in waiting.
yeah, that just seems like a giant emotional clusters where you're feeling so many competing emotions kind of all at once.
Mhm,
Does seem like a very challenging thing that I don't think, like you're right, society does not really address those
Mhm.
things. It's like we stay fixated on the conversation around, even the conversation around teen pregnancy is just, you could get STDs or you could end
mhm,
up pregnant, and then that's kind of where it stops. It's like we're
mhm,
not talking about what the reality of those things are. We're not having and addressing the conversations and normalizing having these conversations because they are such a potent reality for so many people. It seems like we need to be going into the nuances of what the emotional toll was, and what it was like from your experience, and helping others who may be in that similar situation or may be able to prevent them from getting into that situation.
mhm.
There's so much to that, and I thank you for coming forward and sharing that. I think it's a really vulnerable place. I know that in the
Yeah.
book that I wrote, I share a lot of my own vulnerabilities and like what my wife and I went through in her recovery. And so I know that vulnerability is sometimes kind of challenging and scary. And have you had to deal with any of that? I know that you said like the community around you and the disconnection you may have gotten from your church and family and things like that. But once you started to open up and really tell the world about that and really start to express it, um, how has that been received?
So it's been received pretty well. Honestly, I try to focus on the light. And when I'm writing and I'm expressing my personal views about things, I make sure that I let them know these are my personal views. This is my experience. This is how I viewed it. It's not, being disrespectful to anyone else, but this is what I really had to deal with. And so I wanted to come out and let people know people are really dealing with things because of the comments of others, because of the situations of the past, and they're growing up to be adults still dealing with these childhood and teen issues. So that's why I like Unattached the final season, because it shows my 20-year journey. It takes you through a journey of me telling my story at 22, to me giving my 22-year-old self at 32 advice, and then at 36 I'm looking back at my advice at 32, and I'm like, wow, this is my growth through that time frame. So I'm pretty sure my book has upset a few people, but to the people that it mattered, I made sure that I said, hey, I'm writing this book. You're a part of this book. You're in this book. I'm not utilizing your name. I'm protecting our privacy, but I really want to get my story out. So attached was for me. I needed to get that out of me. But unattached, I always say, is for the world because it shows the lessons, it shows the growth, and it's universal. I believe that everyone who picks up the book is going to learn something. It doesn't matter what religion they are, what sex they are, what race they are. what culture they come from. They're going to learn something from that book because it's something that everybody deals with, which is transformation. So it's been a very interesting journey with just trying to tell my story, be as transparent as possible while still keeping others safe in the process.
Shondra, you would really, this is a total resource for you right here, is this gentleman. He is amazing. His wife went through a sexual assault, and I was so honored to have gotten to know him. And it was that, that chemistry where you just feel like fast friends, but you know that it's the real deal. Sean's the real deal. He wrote this book that you see behind him, and it talks about the point of view that nobody talks about, like the partner's point of view from somebody who went through something like this. And he is so big on advocating for ending sexual violence and and sexual violent crimes. And this is the perspective of the partner who finds out the significant other's been violated. And it is such a resource because not only do we hear it from a partner point of view, we hear it from a man's point of view. Mm-hmm. And that is such a great resource, for what you're doing and everything as well. And anything a Contagious Smile can do, I'm happy to help in any way as well. But Sean is just an amazing resource, especially from those 2 points of view.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to say that I think that offering people that unique perspective, from what it's like to have gone through so much of what you've gone through and your, kind of personal journey it's so important to share with people. And I just feel like kind of like kindred spirits here with the idea that, in that vulnerability, like leaning into it, really sharing the experiences that people need to hear. Like what you were saying, like your story, so many people can gain so much information from, no matter what their life experience is, because it's just so true in transition, right? That concept of transformation and the transitional moments in our lives and things. And so I just want to say thank you for that. And I think that from the perspective that Victoria was just talking about is one of the interlaps, or the, I guess, overlaps, the intersections that I see between, kind of your work and what I've done is, how have you found, like, in new relationships, how have you found that the lessons that you've learned, but also kind of some of the traumas that you sometimes carry, how have they affected the relationships that you found yourself in after that?
So after that relationship, I just kind of took a break for a while because, of course, I needed to figure out me for a moment. When I finally started dating again, I noticed there were some things that I still needed to do work on. And I was like, okay, well, in this area, I see that you're still a little clingy, so we need to work on that. So I just started identifying more. And then when I would see certain characteristics in people that I used to ignore, I'm like, no, we can't ignore that. We have to address that, because if you continue to ignore it, you know where it leads to. So I have been very verbal in dating now. I ask questions off rip, like, listen, do you do this? Is this important to you? Is this not important to you? I have children. How do you feel about children? I'm not capable of having more kids. Is that going to be an issue in the future? Are you a communicator? And they're just like, wow. But I'm like, I need to know this now, because there's no point in wasting time if there's nothing there. And then being comfortable with saying, you're not for me. Because there were times in past relationships where I would know that they wasn't the person for me, but I would stay there because of just culture, or just being able, or seeing my grandparents in their relationship and how it worked, and I wanted mine to work, and just wanted to stay there. It's okay, they'll grow out of it. But it's like now, like, no, we're not going to do that. So I had to cut off what I was accustomed to and just be more verbal now. So I think that's been my strongest suit with dating, is knowing what I want and also being verbal about what I want. And also understanding that I need someone who's going to be able to accept me for me and every part of me, my past, my present, and what's to come, because I am verbal about my past. So it's being verbal about my past and my interviews and my book, are those things going to be triggers for you? Are you going to be embarrassed by that? Because if you are, I'm not the person for you. And I'm okay with that because I'm sitting in my okay and I'm living in my okay and I need you to be okay. So if being with me makes you uncomfortable, then I'm not the person for you. And it's okay.
Good for you.
Yeah,
Good
for
for
real.
you.
Like the really acknowledging red flags and the lessons, it just speaks to how
Your growth.
strong
Yeah.
your growth is. Right, exactly. Like the discernment that you have to be able to recognize red flags, spot them, ask for them, really try and provoke them out as soon as possible so that, they don't get hidden, under the surface. And, because it really is, I found in my own growth, really the lesson of codependency was one of the big things, one of the biggest challenges for me overcoming was this concept of like getting into a relationship, spotting those red flags, and then those challenging my codependency habits, where it was like, okay, you know that these red flags are existing. Can you walk away? Can you bring up this whole thing, or are you just going to accept this like we did in the past? And it was like, it was so interesting how, like, when I left my first marriage and then got into another relationship pretty soon after that, it was like life tested me with all the things I thought I knew. It was like, oh, I had all these epiphanies when I left that marriage. I felt so strong in myself to like get out of a toxic situation. And then the next relationship was like, all right, let's see if you learned. And, and it wasn't until, and then once I learned, it was the next relationship after that when I like proved to myself, okay, I really did learn. Then I knew all the right things, like what you were saying, is like have all the right questions all up front. We had, my wife and I and our current, we literally sat down and had like a night where we were like 32 questions deep, went deep dive before we even said yes to dating. We like went super deep into all these questions to kind of, because we both had all these like triggers from our past to like really work on that spot that you were just talking about. It's like, let's have these conversations now so that we're not wasting each other's time, so that we're not hurting each other in the future. Like, it's like, let's get it out all on the table right now. And so, yeah, I really acknowledge you for doing that too, because that's something that was it helped me overcome that codependency, was to like really kind of stand in my strength, stand in my, like you said, stand in my okay, stand in the fact that I'm okay being alone. And so if I have to be alone in order to not be in another abusive relationship, that's everything. So kudos
And
to that.
in our with the nonprofit, we have our monthly meetings. And within the conversation that we had this past Saturday, that was one of the things that we focused on, just learning how to be alone. And I share with them one of the things that I do. I said, sometimes when I'm feeling alone at night, I'll literally just start laughing with myself. And I'll remind myself, this is just a moment. I'm going to appreciate this moment. And when I begin to, or when I'm with my mate, I'm going to remember this moment. If we're having a moment where we're, bickering or whatever, I'm just like, oh, I don't want them close to me. I'm going to remember these lonely nights now, because now I have someone beside me and I have the power to start a conversation, to be reasonable, to communicate, because there were times when I wanted to communicate with somebody and it wasn't there. So appreciating my alone time so that I can appreciate the time with my mate even more.
Absolutely. Tell everybody where we can find you, ma'am.
So you can find me at Shondra, HASHONDRA.me. So that houses everything that I do and everything that I am.
Well, I want to make sure we also put the links up for your book, if you're okay with that, on both of your books, so we can put those out there as well. And I would love for you to come back again if you would like to do that.
I would. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you for having me.
It's been a pleasure getting to know you, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.